Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. I'm Justin, your host for this episode. At the time of this recording, the Bitcoin block height is at 725,945, and the Bitcoin price in Australian dollars is 53,550. I'm joined today by Bayani Mills, the owner and operator of Koined.store, which is the most recent addition to the SatSpend Bitcoin list. And if you're not sure what that is, that's simply a list of Australian businesses that accept Bitcoin. How's it going, Bayani?
Good, thanks.
That's good. Could you tell us briefly what Koined.store is?
Koined.store is a Bitcoin merch store that accepts both fiat and Bitcoin payments, on-chain and Lightning.
Nice. What sort of things do you guys sell?
Hats, shirts, pants, a range of different products, but they're all got their own little bit of Bitcoin flavor in them.
Nice. I like it. I might get some more detail about the store from you later, and especially the journey and how it integrated with Bitcoin, or vice versa, how you integrated Bitcoin with the store. But before getting to that, I'm curious just to know a bit about your personal Bitcoin journey. So feel free to approach this chronologically or in concepts, however you'd like. But yeah, what got you into Bitcoin?
Well, I'd like to say it started in 2012, but I think that journey finished as fast as it started. I read an article in Verge. Price was at $12. Bitcoin was difficult to get. On-ramps were difficult outside of peer-to-peer trading. Didn't really get Bitcoin or really understand financial markets. I basically still don't.
Yeah. Who does?
But I liked it for two key reasons. It was a worldwide digital currency, and that really piqued my interest. I thought it was really interesting and a cool development. As most people would have seen Bitcoin recently, they sort of see it as a way to make some money, and I did too. And I think I've really developed from there. Tinkering around with some exchanges and pool mining after the 2017 bull run. I was largely just buying digital things that weren't necessarily Bitcoin, but I think everyone goes through that phase. If you're in it at the moment, you'll grow out of it, hopefully.
Very true. I think that trajectory is pretty standard, isn't it? Almost there, where it's like get into it as an investment, and then you start to like tinker, learn a bit more about it, and you appreciate really what it is. But of course, part of that journey is a bit of shitcoining and trying to find the next Bitcoin or the next most profitable, cryptocurrency. But I think, most people that do the research and that spend the time end up just converging back to Bitcoin. At least what I've experienced personally and with a few people I know.
Yeah, I would have to wholeheartedly agree. It's something that I have taken into consideration when people are talking with me about Bitcoin, because I take the time to understand where they're at in that journey, and often they are looking for that next Bitcoin, that next 100x. But there is not going to be another Bitcoin. It's one and done.
Absolutely. And 100x is still possible with Bitcoin. And even if it's not 100x, it's something that allows you to save simplistically without needing to be an expert in macroeconomics and exchange rates and geopolitics. You can just save in hard money, super simple, and it becomes an asset and an investment at the same time as just your savings.
Totally.
Is there anything over the course of time that you think might have primed you to be interested in Bitcoin? Because you kind of mentioned it's like, a freedom-based digital currency. Like, is there a certain reason that you think, like in your own history or something that you've experienced or that you've seen in the world that's made you go, we need that, that's important? Like, what do you think primed you for it?
I've always been a bit of a techie, always liked tinkering, and this was something new. And that's what I suppose continued to draw me to it. Because it was a new type of technology. The fact that I could transact very easily, very fast, comparatively to legacy systems like Western Union and MoneyGram, meant that I could send money overseas to family very quickly without needing to rely on the brick and mortar system that we have in place today.
It's huge, isn't it, that fact? Just removing intermediaries, even if they're not corrupt, they're often inefficient and expensive.
Yeah, 100%. This totally opened the way for me to do so. And over the years, I've bought a node with Bitcoin, bought Bitcoin merch with Bitcoin, commissioned artwork with Bitcoin, as mentioned, sent remittances to family with Bitcoin. And in just the last year, I've used it to buy hardware wallets, a block clock, paid for roof repairs after a recent typhoon overseas.
Yeah.
Used it to buy a generator for a property overseas, and provided capital to a family member for their fruit and veg store. So it certainly opens up a lot of avenues for use.
I think, and I'm glad to hear that too, because I've been getting into the last 6, even back as far as 12 months, using my Bitcoin more. Whereas the first few years, it was really just about saving, trying to accrue more. And apart from some of the shitty trading that I did in the first year or so. But more recently, I love it. Actually, every time I buy something with Bitcoin, or I donate to something with Bitcoin, or I send money just to a friend or a family member with Bitcoin, it feels good to use it. And it really starts to drum home like how important it is and how functional it is. And so I know there's a big divide, it feels like, in the community, where some people are like, yeah, you shouldn't ever sell your sats. You should always hold your sats. And that creates the next hodl floor, which helps the price go up, and number go up is really important. I think number go up is going to happen regardless, because most people spending their Bitcoin, if you're anything like me, you would be replacing that as well. You wouldn't just spend 100%. It and then leave it. You would then put fiat back in eventually to rekindle your Bitcoin amount.
Yeah, that spend and replace model is really what's going to help drive adoption, in my view. As you mentioned, there is this divide of hodling and not selling your sats. But if you are actually spending and replacing, you can ensure that your sats are being dispersed amongst the rest of the plebs who might otherwise have no other way of accumulating more Bitcoin. So
very true.
It does allow those people to then send those sats to someone else, whether it's locally. I've encouraged family members overseas to talk to other people about Bitcoin. I've got them onboarded with, say, Moon Wallet or Wallet Satoshi as very simple platforms that they can use to start using Bitcoin, whether or not it is amongst themselves in a family unit or amongst themselves in a local community. At least then there is some continued use of Bitcoin, and by continuing to feed into those circular economies, we can continue to decentralize the network. It doesn't suit anyone if Bitcoin's only in Western countries at all.
And I'm glad you mentioned that term, like circular economy, because I feel like that should be the next wave of what we're trying to do as Bitcoiners, as plebs, is to get it out there more, get more Bitcoin in people's hands, especially other Bitcoiners and people running Bitcoin businesses. Yep. Places like El Salvador are a great like aspirational model that we should all look at. And although this isn't tax advice, I do think that there is some benefit with the spend and replace model that allows you to then make use of that personal use kind of clause, which means you don't have, it's not a taxable event, it's not a capital gains taxable event, because you're always going to have a very recent purchase which you can then spend, and then once you've spent, you buy another recent purchase of Bitcoin, and therefore most times that you're spending, it's going to be something that's relatively recent. And so I think that's what has stopped, I know it's what stopped me for a long time transacting in Bitcoin, is I thought, oh, I don't want to have to deal with the headache, I've got to record all that, and it's capital gains, I've got to work it out. And then I realized, no, you don't really, as long as you keep it somewhat separate from your investment or your long-term stack. So it's clear if anyone ever does audit that, hey, this was intended for personal use and I bought it recently. And even if I'm spending something that I didn't buy recently, I then replace that quickly with something else. And it starts to make it arguable that you're using it for personal use. And that kind of exempts you from a lot of the record keeping kind of head fuckery that can sometimes happen with tax, especially if you're buying frequently, like coffees or sending money overseas. You don't want to have to like keep every single transaction in that way and do capital gains tax for everything. So again, not tax advice, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, I have a very similar understanding. The intent is important.
Absolutely.
If you're accumulating Bitcoin to spend, then it should be treated as any other currency that you might be purchasing, whether it be USD or whatever it might be.
That's it. So over time, were there any like moments in history that you've seen in the world, whether recently or more kind of distant history, that have really made you realize Bitcoin is the thing, or is it more so what you've just mentioned? So like tinkering, understanding it better, and
tinkering and understanding it better
yeah.
Has helped me to understand the global financial markets a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's meant that I'm keeping a closer eye on what's happening. For instance, the devaluation of the currency in Turkey has been going on for a while, but it's only been in, I suppose, more commercial mainstream news only recently, which is interesting because as much as there's been other outlets that have reported it, no one's really ran with it. So, speaking to some Turkish friends, I said, how's it going over there with the lira? Are people opting into Bitcoin? And yeah, the answer is yes. It's certainly very big amongst millennials. They see the value proposition of Bitcoin better than some older people like Peter Schiff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably a good point about gold, because Turkey, there was some news that came out from there recently, essentially saying that I think it would have been their central bank going to citizens to say, we'd like to buy your gold. And it was more of a request than a demand. But I have this cynical view of government that sometimes requests very quickly become demands. And then all of a sudden we're coming in, we're taking your gold. You're not allowed to own it because it's better with us. We need to support the lira. And buying something like Bitcoin, it's not confiscation proof, but it's certainly more confiscation resistant. And it's much more expensive to try to confiscate than, say, something like gold. The returns on that, say, violence that would be needed to get someone's gold is far greater than, say, the returns on violence to get someone's Bitcoin, which means they're disincentivized to do it. And so it's smart that the Turkish people are looking that way now.
Yeah, there's been a lot of concern about how the Reserve Bank there has dealt with inflation, and that comes from the top. My understanding is that comes from the top. But if you have somebody that wants to essentially dictate how the financial market should move, and this is the result, well,
it's not going to end well, is it?
It won't end well. No, it's not ending well. It's not ending well. So those types of examples, like Turkey or Argentina or Venezuela, they're all examples that I point to when I'm orange pilling people about, whilst we here in Australia might not necessarily have those pressures on us, they certainly do apply to other people, and the value propositions from the Bitcoin network and Bitcoin as a currency apply to those people.
And I think that we seem to believe we're more insulated here in Australia than what we actually are. Sure, we are nowhere near as far along as, say, like a Venezuela or Turkey in terms of inflation. We're not even as far along as America, arguably. Yeah. However, the majority of our reserve assets are foreign currencies, and the biggest proportion of that is the US dollar. You could even look at that in terms of a global sense. The biggest reserve asset in global reserves is the US dollar. So if the US dollar is doing bad things that lead to inflation, we are going to be impacted one way or another. And we should probably look to examples like Turkey or Venezuela to see, like, what does that look like? Or even just look at America and say, like, we're probably lagging 6 to 12 months behind them. I think there's a false sense of security here that, like, no, Australia's good. We're not doing it that bad. We'll never get, that far along. However, it always kind of ends this way, doesn't it? All fiat currencies lead to some level of collapse or hyperinflation type event.
Yeah, El Salvador is certainly ahead of the curve on this. They've seen how moving to a Bitcoin standard has been beneficial for their country's sovereign independence away from the US dollar, which, arguably is what we know to be the reason why the WEF is looking to ensure that they try and take that away from them. they're trying to look out for the US dollar. The US is looking out for the US dollar. But the problem is the US dollar and how it's managed. You can't keep kicking the can down the road and think that's going to be okay.
And I think it's Alex Gladstein that puts it this way, that America's biggest export is inflation, because there are so many current countries that need to hold the American currency to pay their debts, as an example, or they've actually adopted the US dollar as their own currency, like El Salvador had done and still does at the moment. But it means they don't get any of the welfare that money printing leads to in America. They just get the inflation. Yeah. And I think like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's not really the definition of insanity, but it's a nice kind of like, it's a nice phrase that helps to sum it up. But if you think like El Salvador, their own currency hyperinflated to the point where they needed to then adopt the US currency. And now the US dollar is hyperinflating, or at least it's inflating. It's not technically hyperinflating, but it's certainly getting there. And we can see the trajectory that it's on. So it makes a lot of sense that they as a country, with that experience that they've had, now going through 2 times events of inflation, to say, well, let's not do that again. Let's not repeat the same mistakes and expect a different outcome. Let's do something totally different. Let's adopt this hard money thing and see what happens.
Exactly right. They've lived through it once. They don't want to live through it again. And Bitcoin offers them a way to opt out.
And going back to the Turkey example, or even, I guess, any example of a country experiencing hyperinflation, it's pretty broad, isn't it? Because, you look at citizens that are saving dollars and then end up losing their savings because the dollar inflates. But also it stops them being able to then get out of that debt or that poverty, because if you're earning dollars and still saving in dollars, you're just, again, repeating the same thing. That's probably an obvious point, but sometimes I look at it in terms of running a business. And if you have a business, it's very difficult to accurately predict or forecast things. Like, how do you sign up a 1-year contract or a 5-year contract to buy certain goods or to sell certain goods if the price of those things could change drastically because of inflation, because of the weakness or the strength of the dollar that it's denominated in, whether you're buying something from someone else and their currency changes or vice versa. It just makes it incredibly difficult to have any long, some low time preference or long-term thinking, not just in terms of your personal circumstances, but then running a business, which means we're probably missing out on a lot, societally speaking, of people not being entrepreneurial because it's too big of a risk. They need to understand, global markets, macroeconomics, geopolitical machinations, all the currency exchange. They need to understand all that just to run a simple business, even if it's something as simple as like, I don't know, just a local store that needs to then import, say, a couple of products that will drastically change what they need to know as a business operator, which is, it's kind of crazy to me that we're expecting everyone to be experts in everything just to run a relatively simple business.
So personally with my store, my preference obviously is Bitcoin, but the overheads all come out as fiat. So whilst I am accepting of that, my goal is essentially to be able to provide a way for people to increase awareness and adoption of Bitcoin, whilst also accumulating Bitcoin myself, because that allows me to then continue to sell my sats in place of a spend in place model, because they're giving me currency and I'm using that same currency to buy other things for other people. So it's for a business like mine, the short term doesn't hurt, but certainly when you start looking at businesses that need to continue to have an inflow of consumables, that can be a problem, especially when your currency, your fiat currency, is changing by 5-10% a day.
True.
Coffees are going up ridiculous amounts, and that's in Western countries. People are like, hang on, I just bought a coffee for $4.50, and now today it's $5.10. It's like, yeah.
And we also get shrinkflation with that too. I swear the coffees that I would buy previously were much larger than the coffees that I buy now, which are more expensive, but yeah, also a size down. Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, your background, liking tech, being a tinkerer, understanding some of the macroeconomics, some of the atrocities that are happening in terms of inflation to different countries in the world, that's that's primed you for Bitcoin. Is there any influential people, any like people that you've listened to in podcasts that you think have have really made things like click or become salient in your mind of, all right, it's not about shitcoins, it's about Bitcoin, and should make my life about this? Like, what's been, or has there been anyone that's really stood out, do you think?
It's a very gradually then suddenly story. You do need to pick up bits and pieces of information on the way. And when you start connecting those dots in a solid way, then you might end up more of a Bitcoin maxi. You have a lower time preference, which certainly helps understand things in a broader sense. There hasn't been, I guess, one or a few people that have been instrumental, because I don't necessarily listen to podcasts a hell of a lot. Where I was working, it was only less than 15 minutes up the road. So a lot of the podcasts are generally quite long form. And so I would hear bits and pieces of some of the topics. But it would take maybe 4 days to go through a podcast.
Yeah, that can be like that. I know. So they're getting longer as well. I swear most podcasts I look at now are about 3 hours, and I think, shit, that's a commitment. Even if I'm on like double speed and really paying attention, like an hour and a half, that's a lot of time. And I can't be doing anything else while I'm listening to that at 1.5 times speed.
It did actually take me quite a while to go through the Bitcoin Standard as an audiobook. For that very reason. The job I was in took up a lot of time. It was very ad hoc, so things were coming up all the time, which ultimately means interruptions, which means things get pushed off. So now being an unemployed pleb, basically trying to find a role in the Bitcoin space specifically would be nice, but not rushing because I'm just enjoying life at the moment.
That's it. Yeah, look, you mentioned that before we hit record. So you just left your job this week. So this is the first day or the first week?
This is week one.
Week
one. I've already got employees, previous employees asking to come back.
That's a good sign. It's nice to feel wanted.
Like, can you help us out this week? You know what? This is supposed to be week one. As much as I'd love to help them, I got to look out for me in the long term.
I think there's like a saying of like, you have to let your fiat self die and then adopt a Bitcoin standard, not just in terms of monetarily, but in terms of the way you think about the world, what you put out into the world, what you help develop.
That's it. It's week one and I bought another miner, so it's
nice. I love to see it.
So I'm just doubling down on what I love to do. It's orange pilling is going well. Talking to other people about Bitcoin, and even just trying to normalize myself into asking each time I go to a store, do you accept Bitcoin yet?
Yeah.
It's those little things that will chip away at people. And, I'm obviously wearing my own merch out. So it means that people are picking up on it. People do ask questions, which is great. That's exactly what I'm after.
Exactly.
And I think starting locally is what every person can do, whether or not it's asking a local coffee shop, do you accept Bitcoin? Which might, by the way, if they do, get back to you and put it up on SatSpend. Because we want to build out that resource. So if we can get that to a point where it can let everyone know that they've got something close by that will accept Bitcoin, it might be a currency of choice for some people.
I think that's a really good approach to adoption as well, is just asking the simple question, do you accept Bitcoin? And even putting, do you accept Bitcoin yet? Which is like, it's inevitable. Why don't you accept it? It's all implied. And it's just a simple sentence to throw at the end whenever you're checking out anywhere. The reason I think this is really important, so like my background is in psychology, and there's this thing in psychology called the stages of change. And no matter what someone's doing, whether they're trying to do more of a habit or less of a habit, they're going through these stages of change. The first two stages are called pre-contemplative and contemplative. What that means is like they're before the point of contemplating change, or they're starting to contemplate change. And at that point, which is where I think most no-coiners are, you can't offer advice, you can't offer strategies, you can't offer guidance because they won't listen to it, which is usually what happens. Like we go into a party or we go into like, family and friends and we talk a lot about Bitcoin and no one's ready for it. No one's primed for it because they're pre-contemplative. They're like, I don't even think I need to think about this.
Correct.
Or maybe they go, I'm starting to think about it, but I don't know. Is this important? Do I need to do it? When people move to the point of planning and saying like, yes, I think I need to know more about Bitcoin, then you can offer all the advice, all the podcasts, all the guidance, and they'll absorb it, they'll suck it up.
Yeah.
But those first two steps, pre-contemplative and contemplative, where most people are, the best thing to do, like in psychology, is to establish that there's a disparity between where they are and where they want to be. And so that can sometimes be just asking, do you accept Bitcoin yet? Because it starts to let them know, well, here's where you are not accepting Bitcoin, and here's where your customers are wanting you to accept Bitcoin. So it's going to move them into that kind of contemplation and maybe a bit of planning of like, well, how hard is this Bitcoin thing? Is it easy to do? Because if it is, maybe I'll just do it so that customer will shut up. But but I guess the point is, like, you need to create the disparity. For some people, it's like savings, like, oh, I really can't get ahead. I've been saving for a house, but it keeps getting further and further away. And it's like, that really sucks. Like, if only there was some hard money. People keep talking about this Bitcoin thing because it's got a limited supply, and that seemed to go really well for past hard assets. Creating that disparity rather than saying you should buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin's great for this and this and this. Like, trying to meet someone where they're at and just help them realize where you are. There's this other point a little bit ahead of that that's a little bit better, and maybe think about that difference, and that'll move people to become motivated. So I think it's perfect. Simple phrase: do you accept Bitcoin yet?
No, thank you. It's that's exactly the angle. At the end of the day, people aren't where we are, and it's about bringing them along, and sometimes holding their hand with it. They don't know what they don't know, and so you can guide them, and by using what they currently know or think they know, you can use that scaffold and provide them examples of why other people find Bitcoin valuable and why they might. Obviously, only through talking with them and understanding their circumstance are you going to have an understanding of what value propositions does Bitcoin offer to that individual. And
that's right.
For a small coffee shop, it's an option that they can take on pretty easily. Obviously, it's a little bit harder for those chains to take on.
I like that when you say scaffold, like I use that term a lot because it's, if you can think of it inside of our mind, we have like a cognitive scaffolding. It's like all the stuff we know about the world. And the way we learn is by comparing this new information to the scaffold. And if it's got a place to hang, like it's got similar concepts or parallel concepts, or maybe like we've learned that concept before, it's very difficult to not understand it. And if you understand something, it's very difficult to not remember it. Even if you don't come back to that concept a lot, in like 5 years' time, you'll still remember it, kind of thing. But no coiners don't have that scaffold, or they have a different scaffold. And so Bitcoin doesn't compute. They try to compare it to what they already know, and they think, well, I don't think there's that problem in the world, so why do I need this fix for this problem that doesn't exist? Or I don't think I need hard money. I don't think I need to accept Bitcoin payments. It's like they're comparing it to what they know about the world, and they're more likely to throw that new information out because it doesn't match what they know about the world. So you're absolutely right, trying to find like what scaffold do they have, because there's a parallel there, there's a solution there, and Bitcoin can provide it, and that will let them more easily like hang that somewhere on the scaffold next to something else that's kind of related to it. And once it's there, they'll start to see more and more Bitcoin related stuff that does associate with their scaffold. And then actually in the fullness of time, they start to pull off some other crap that doesn't need to be on that scaffolding after all. And it gets replaced with something like Bitcoin, but it's a gradual process. And yeah, you have to do exactly what you said, like target their scaffold. Don't target your own, because we already know it. But if someone's not at that point yet, there's no point, pitching it at that level.
Yeah, you got to try and reduce that cognitive dissonance between what they think the world is like, which might very well be true for them. But it's bringing that new information, like you said. Having them understand that whilst they, as an individual, might not value these things, other people do, and collectively, because of the Bitcoin network properties, it's got value. One of the questions that you might get is, where does the value from Bitcoin come from? And people don't have that scaffold to build off an understanding about Bitcoin or the Bitcoin network. And I make those two things very clear to people when I'm speaking with them, because I can draw parallels between currency, well, money, and the banking systems to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin network. And that helps them understand the concept a little bit better.
That's right, because sometimes there's a philosophical underpinning that might even be a little bit wrong when they say, like, what's it backed by?
Yeah.
So what's anything backed by? You know, is there inherent value in anything, or do we give something value because it has properties that are useful?
Yeah.
Does the currency even have backing? Like sometimes even just going at that level, because most people believe like, well, our currency is backed by something. It's backed by gold maybe, or even if it's other currencies, or maybe it's the military might, or it's the promise. Like they believe it's backed by something. So yeah, got to talk in their language.
I had that same question asked the other day. Isn't it backed by gold? Yeah, I'm like, no, it's not. And that was a bit of an eye opener for them. But you know, didn't press it because they have to process that information, put it into onto that scaffold, and develop from there. And next time I'll hit them up, I'm sure it'll come up. Just continue on. If you overload people with information, it doesn't necessarily end well. They get to a point where they will shut down.
Yes.
And then you're just talking at them at that point.
True. Although that seems fun for the first couple of years in Bitcoin, you get to a point where you just think, well, look, this is a pretty useless conversation. I know what I'm going to say here, so this is not that entertaining for me anymore. I've already honed what I want to say. This person's just not receptive. So feed them a bite-sized chunk, and you get to have that conversation iteratively over multiple conversations, and it's much more fruitful for everyone involved. So true.
First hit free.
Yes, exactly. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about your store. So do I have this right where it was around 2017 that you decided to set it up?
No, actually, so it was during my my shitcoinery phase.
Gotcha. Yeah.
In fact, it was doing much better as a shitcoins merch store.
They often are, which is really unfortunate. Same as like exchanges and trading, and you know, shitcoins is where the money is at the moment, unfortunately. But that's, I think, a hype cycle that is destined to be, you know, to end. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. So towards the start of 2020 was when I really started to open it up. Parman, which some viewers, some listeners might actually have heard of on Twitter. He suggested, why don't you go Bitcoin only? I'm like, you know what? Let's make the change. So I did. And since then, it's been a Bitcoin only store.
That's great. And what gave you the idea just of doing clothing, merch, that sort of thing?
I'd always played around with these ideas of drop shipping, direct to print, direct to garment printing stores, and bringing something that I enjoyed doing, being Bitcoin, into this seemed like a reasonable step for me to obviously make some money. At the end of the day, I'm trying to stack sats. This is a side gig that I could run, where I could just accumulate more Bitcoin, just a little bit of each day.
True. And I understand if some of this is confidential because it's sort of internal business stuff, but how much do customers use Bitcoin versus other types of fiat currency payment like PayPal or bank transfer or whatever it might be?
I see a lot of people playing around with the idea. They go to the cart and select to pay in Bitcoin. I think they're just trying to work out, okay, well, this is interesting, which is great because they're testing out the technology, right? You want to get that technology where people are more comfortable with it. So I run a BTC Pay server, and that is obviously at my home. It means that you're not having to deal with PayPal or having to deal with any other type of intermediary. You're dealing directly with myself. And so as a percentage, I would say it would be fair to say probably half of sales are in Bitcoin, which tends to seem to follow the price of Bitcoin. Prices go up, people are more likely to spend.
Yes.
Prices go down, people are less likely to spend.
That makes sense.
Which is fine, because at the end of the day, if you are following a spend and replace model, then it doesn't really matter. Yeah.
True.
$25 is $25. But it doesn't bother me because the long term goal at the end of the day is to just keep accumulating, whatever we can do for that.
Has there been any problems integrating, I guess, more like the Bitcoin payments into the store that you have?
So with a very simple implementation on Shopify, it was pretty simple to do. There are already platforms out there that allow stores, say a cafe or any type of small business, to implement the acceptance of Bitcoin into their storefront. But yeah, it was pretty simple. Haven't had any problems other than the fact that occasionally I lose power here. We've had some some poor weather here in Sydney, so
true,
for a little while. that's the problematic part. But it just basically means that you can't bring up a Bitcoin payment address. But if someone already generated one and wanted to pay the next day, they could. I don't need my node online for that.
Gotcha. And if you had like an uninterruptible power supply, is that something that would it solve it?
It would solve the power issue, but it doesn't necessarily solve the issue if there's no internet.
Of course. Yeah, that's right.
I could have a backup with cellular, but again, if there's no power and no internet, then everyone's jamming up the cellular network around here.
Definitely.
Pretty dense where I am, so it's not very good.
I wonder what the solution for that is, even if it's, you have a static address on your website, and if the BTC Pay server is down, they can pay with a static address and, I don't know, send you an email or something to let you know the transaction ID or something like that. I mean, that's a bit clunky and it's not ideal, but it's probably a good backup. I'm not totally sure what the solution is there.
There are solutions like Voltage Cloud that you can run a node remotely with the service. But it really comes down to having contingencies. At the end of the day, I'm just a small store. I don't have much downtime. If my problems extend to a couple of hours downtime a year because of weather, then I'm comfortable with that.
Not a big deal. And especially if there's a fair bit of setup time or even outgoing cost to have a server run somewhere else, like a node hosted somewhere else. It might not be worthwhile in terms of the time that you actually lose during the year when there's no internet or no power. True. Is there anything that integrating Bitcoin has made easier in your life, particularly with the store?
Not particularly. Other than the fact that it's obviously going straight into my wallet. So I don't have to worry, again, about PayPal, MasterCard, all that kind of thing. Even if my node is down, the store can still process fiat payments, much like when Visa or MasterCard go down. My node can still process Bitcoin payments. So these aren't systems that are infallible. The propensity for Visa or MasterCard to go down, or in fact a bank's system to go down, means that people are forced into other avenues.
I'm curious, what is the cost of having a Bitcoin option for payment in your store? What I mean by that is, so Visa and MasterCard usually have a processing fee. I think PayPal does to a certain extent if you're a seller, where they want to take a bit of a cut of it. And I'm not totally sure what those percentages are. I imagine it's anywhere from like 1 to 3%.
It's about that, yeah.
And on a Bitcoin, not just Bitcoin standard, but like taking Bitcoin payments, if you are on a Bitcoin standard, I guess that's relatively easy because you don't need to transfer that anywhere. You put it in your wallet and that's it. You might want to like mix it or put it into a separate wallet so it can't be traced or something like that. But otherwise, it's not too expensive. I guess the problem would arise if you then wanted to, say, like pay fiat bills with the Bitcoin that someone's paid you. You need to like transfer that in an exchange or something like that. And I'm curious, do you do that? And if you do, does it end up being about the same as the processing fees for Visa or MasterCard, or is it less or is it more? Like how does that end up?
So 100% of my Bitcoin sales are on my balance sheet. I don't move them from there. It means that I can spend what I'm currently holding on my hot wallet, or if, for those that don't necessarily know, it may be like a software wallet, like Moon or Wallet Satoshi. It makes it a lot easier to spend sats throughout the day. If you want to send some sats to a friend that you're orange pilling, or if you need to settle a bar tab.
So we could say you're on a Bitcoin standard. You have Bitcoin in the treasury and you accept Bitcoin, which I think is doubly
100%,
good.
100%. It's if I paid for a meal and a friend wants to split the bill, then I say, hey, listen, pay me in Bitcoin, because and so I try and get them interacting in that way as well. It makes it a little bit, it normalizes it.
True.
Rather than having to make it something foreign to them. Like we said earlier, just giving those little bits and pieces to hang on the scaffold for them to grow on.
And I think once people see how simple it is, Lightning payments especially, someone can just download Blue Wallet or Moon Wallet. You can very quickly send them a Lightning transaction and it's done.
Yeah.
On-chain, especially while the fees are low, is really not that difficult either, because you don't need to wait for the full transaction confirmation, especially sending money to a friend.
Exactly.
So you just pay a small fee, even pay 1 sat per byte, and just let it clear over the next few days. There's no impatience to it. So there's less and less barriers for entry now. And I think the more people see it and use it, they see how user-friendly it is.
Yeah, the mempool has been very, very good lately.
Definitely. Yeah, look, I think even if it gets pretty hectic during the week sometimes, normally waiting until Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, you're getting back to the mempool being cleared.
Yeah, yep.
So I had a look at your site, and I like the look of a lot of the merch. And it's the same thing that I've thought about other Bitcoin merch that I've looked at, where I'm about to order, and then I think, my OPSEC, especially since doing podcasts, is now really shit. So I'm trying to maintain that as much as I can. And I'm curious, have you had the thought of having some good OPSEC swag, something that's like maybe a bit of a hat tip to a Bitcoin-related meme, without making it so clear to non-Bitcoiners that you might hold Bitcoin if you're wearing this shirt or hat or whatever it might be?
There are plans for a more subtle range that are, I guess, in jokes.
That's perfect.
Yeah, so it would mean that Bitcoiners can see Bitcoiners. But I think the large push for what I've tried with this site is to bring about, certainly there's a range there where I'm using the Bitcoin logo to say, ask me about mining, for instance, or ask me about Bitcoin, or ask me about hope. These are all tropes that we use in the Bitcoin space.
True.
And if you're someone that's keen to talk to another person about it, it certainly does offer a way for you to invite people to do so. There'll be people that are genuine, and there'll be people that there aren't. But certainly those that aren't, you can still turn around. I have.
That's true. And you're right. This is the good thing about meme culture, and especially Bitcoin meme culture, is there's probably so much to draw upon that is related to Bitcoin, but a bit of a tangent, where if you're not totally in it, you wouldn't get it. But if you're in it enough, you'll understand it, and it'll prompt a conversation. Even like, not your keys, not your coins, those sort of phrases, or not your node, not your rules. Someone's going to recognize that and give you like the head nod, or probably more than that. You'll probably end up having a conversation if you run across a random Bitcoiner in the street. I think I know I would.
Yeah, I think those types of shirts would certainly give people the opportunity to touch base with other Bitcoiners. I know that where I am, certainly in my experience, and this is probably a bit sad, but I'm probably the one that knows the most about Bitcoin and the network.
Yeah.
Whereas I would like to, now that I'm an unemployed pleb, I can go to some of these Bitcoin meets, meet up with other Bitcoiners and network. It will mean that I'm learning from other people that know more than I do. And at the end of the day, that's all I can strive for, is just to know more about what's happening in the space. I think for most people, however, when you break down what some people need, them seeing Bitcoin as a currency is as basic as it needs to be for them. Does everyone need to know the ins and outs of UTXOs? No. Is it interesting? Hell yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But nobody virtually nobody knows about how the banking system works, how the ones and zeros get from one bank to another. They might have heard of SWIFT, but they don't necessarily know what it does. But people get through their lives because their lives don't revolve around Bitcoin, and acknowledging that is also an important part of orange pilling people, knowing where they're at. And yeah, not everyone needs to know about everything.
And it's not like we do with other technology either. It's a common example, or a common what's the word, like a rebuttal or an argument that comes up where they say, well, you know, we don't know who their inventor is, and that makes it a bit weird to use, or I don't understand exactly how it works, and that makes it too prohibitive. You think, well, no one knows the inventor of the wheel. No one could explain to you how TCP/IP works to use the internet or email or SMTP, you know, POP. Like no one knows those things. They might know vaguely that it exists. I do too, but I mean, most normal people, Bayani, don't know what this means. Couldn't explain it. Couldn't tell you who invented it. Couldn't tell you the process that led to its invention. But they use it every single day, and they're like, it's integral to their life. They'd be upset and they'd be frustrated if it was taken away. Yeah. And then they look at something like Bitcoin. It's like, well, I don't know who made it, and I don't know how it works.
Yeah,
but you're absolutely right.
Analogy. It really highlights the fact that people don't need to know everything about it to use the technology. Or to use the money or the network. You know, Jack, with what he's done with Strike, has basically meant that anyone can transact borderlessly without having to know what the Lightning Network is. You can just use it. So I think, when we're talking to people, I think it's important that we're acknowledging where they're at.
Kind of meeting them partway. Yeah, so true. Yeah. Or meeting them actually more than partway. I think they'll never meet us halfway. We've got to get a little bit over further to their side.
Yeah, go to where they're at and understand what their understanding is. And some of them might be wrong. And it's important not to get too upset about it being wrong.
True.
But at least then you can go, well, look, this is what's actually happening. Or if it's something trivial, don't worry about it. You know, address it later when they are more open to being told they're wrong. People don't like being told they're wrong.
No, and I think even for us, sometimes it can be frustrating having a conversation with someone who's just like not getting the detail. And I think what we're really getting frustrated at is that they're having different thoughts than us. They're having a different perspective of the world. And our brain, our mind doesn't like that. It likes everything to have somewhat level of, conformity and consistency. So when someone says like, I don't agree with that, or I don't see that, or I don't think that's the case, it can get really frustrating. And look, sometimes those thoughts can be a little bit silly or wrong. But at the same time, I think we're normally getting a bit frustrated that their thoughts just don't align with our own. And we really want them to, because we've done the research, we know how good it is, we know how it could benefit them as well. But it's about that patience and realizing, look, they have a bunch of different thoughts in their head. That's okay. It'll take time for those thoughts to change, or for them to be ready for them to change in the first place. You got to do it gently and kindly. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a matter of asking them why they believe what they believe, or asking about their thought process, and that can clear it up for you, and you can understand where you might have gone wrong in explaining it. It certainly helps trying to break it down for people. It's a process that you have to go through with each person that you're discussing it with.
And practice, I think. Like I don't like writing essays. I probably enjoy talking and maybe giving presentations more than essays, but both of those things really help you organize your thoughts. And the more you do it, the more analogies or metaphors you come up with, or even practical examples, the better ways of explaining things, and sometimes even limiting the words that you use for the explanation so it can be more interactive. I think that only comes with more and more practice. So even if the conversations can be frustrating for us sometimes, it's still good to talk to people who don't know Bitcoin, don't want to know about Bitcoin, just to kind of find that in and to like sharpen your tools a bit more in terms of having that conversation.
Being more concise.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. Is it perfect example?
Well, it takes some time, there is a amusing quote where someone said, I'd like to write you a shorter email, but I don't have the time.
Yeah, definitely. Should take a page from that book.
It takes a while to find out what works for people at the start and how you can build up from that. And understanding where they are is key, I think.
I'm keen to ask you just a few questions about Bitcoin generally, but before we move on, I know we've sort of been doing that anyway, but before we move on from Koined.store, is there anything that you wanted to tell people about the store that we haven't already talked about, or anything that's upcoming, or just anything on your mind about the store that you think is good for people to know?
No. At the end of the day, I'm not trying to sell my shit. It's something that I just had go in the background, and it's been an interesting experience because I've been able to develop a better understanding about these tools, about using a node, about using the Lightning Network. So it's been an interesting process. So if I could perhaps say to anyone that's looking to do so with their store, go for it. You know, if you've got the technical nous, or you're comfortable doing it, build your own node. It's not difficult, really. It really is not. The instructions for them are readily available. The software options are multiple. So by all means, take the time to run your own node.
It's a good place to start, isn't it? And the communities are great. Look, I'm always happy to individually help people if they try to set up a node and they get stuck. But most of the communities of the node that you're setting up, they're great. They love to help. And they've been through similar problems. And something that I figured out very early in my technology sort of career, I guess if you could call it that, just my personal experience over the years, is that you will never come across a problem that someone else hasn't come across. And so if you ask most of the time, I guess, like every once in a while, there's going to be a new problem, but it's pretty quickly after that, someone else has that same problem. I guess the point is that sometimes it feels unique, like, this is just not going to work for me. This thing came up and, there's no way to solve it. But when you go ask the question, people say like, yeah, that happens all the time. Are you running this or that? Or have you done this yet? And you realize like, this is actually a really simple solution. And then after that one hurdle, the rest of it's smooth. Or sometimes there's a couple more hurdles, but the point being there's always someone that's experienced that same thing, and the communities are like a fount of knowledge to get that information.
I actually run two nodes. One's a more technical one than my Umbrel. Umbrels I found to be very user-friendly, but built that one up from scratch. Very easy to do, very easy.
So Bitcoin generally, what is a very difficult question. What are you most bullish about with Bitcoin, do you think, at the moment at least?
I think just the adoption overall is what I'm seeing and enjoying seeing. The circular economies that are being developed. Yes, El Salvador is that one we all point to because it's so well known. But there's a ton of small circular economies being developed around the world that we just don't know because we don't speak their language. That's basically what it comes down to. We've got a city in Switzerland that's developing one, and that's just come out, announced just the other day.
Laguna,
there's multiple cities in Africa that are doing it.
I remember there's Bitcoin Akasi, I think it is, on Twitter, which is a place in, I'm pretty sure it's Africa, not South Africa. That's, exactly, trying to set up a circular economy, very similar to El Salvador.
I think the more we see of these types of grassroots changes and development, I think that's what's really going to help propel Bitcoin to be used more as a currency. And the more people that do spend and replace, it's going to help drive that. Ultimately, at the moment, you've got a lot of hash power pulling in a lot of Bitcoin. And, for those miners that sell, great, because they're adding that Bitcoin into circulation. And you have some that don't, that will just lend against it. That's cool too. Do what you like. That's basically it's Bitcoin, right? Do what you want to do with your Bitcoin.
It's the idea of freedom money.
Exactly. Do what you want with it. But it's already an internationally available currency. My store is an example of that. I can take money. I could take Bitcoin from around the world. I don't have to sit here trying to prevent somebody from some sanctioned country from buying my gear. Not that I don't think that I'm not allowed to, but I'm sure I'm allowed to sell shirts to Russia, right?
I think so. There's been nothing that I've seen so far that says you can't do that.
So it's seeing these availabilities come up, these opportunities. You know, I would like to see more of them. There's many being developed, but there's such small penetration worldwide of Bitcoin that when you start seeing say a 2% actual penetration of people using the currency, I think we're going to start seeing huge swings in price, which, again, to me, I'm not too fussed about. Some people look at it and go, no, it's too volatile. But yeah, I think it needs to happen. You got to go through that volatility. The volatility for Bitcoin seems to have settled for now, and I think that's only going to change as the next halving comes around. When that kicks in, there's going to be less Bitcoin for those miners to sell. Far less liquid Bitcoin on exchanges.
Every year is Bitcoin's least volatile year. It keeps getting less volatile over time because as the market cap grows, movements are a smaller percentage of that, and so the price doesn't move quite as much. But we're also seeing an asset be monetized for the first time in a very short amount of time, whereas something like gold was monetized over several thousand years. So it would have been volatile too, but not in any individual's life or even like a year or 10 years of their life. Whereas Bitcoin, you're seeing it happen 24/7, 365. It's going to have movements. Whereas, stock market, they have circuit breakers. They only trade 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. They have bailouts. There's all these things that can help to control the volatility. On top of that, if we look at things that are hyperinflating, or I use that term, I know it's technically not hyperinflating yet, but things that are inflating at the moment, things like energy prices, lumber and other commodities and food.
Mm-hmm.
You don't ever hear someone saying, "Oh, look at the price of lumber; it's too volatile to build a house with." Look at the price of oil; it's too volatile to power a car or a house with. Like, people don't say that because I guess we get used to it, or people don't expect to see the volatility in there, even if it is in there. So I guess the point being is that, Bitcoin is becoming less volatile, but I think over the course of time, you can kind of work within that volatility. It's not as bad anymore now, especially than what it, say, was, 5 years back or 10 years back in terms of that up and down that it could go.
And that really comes down to whether or not you're actually using it as a currency. Like,
true.
If you're saving in it long term, you don't have to worry about it. It's that low time preference. But if you're buying to spend, and you've got your stack to the side where you're long-term holding, then it's going to be an easier way forward. I encourage people to try and dollar cost average rather than put large amounts into Bitcoin, because it can be emotionally straining. People put a chunk in. I've had multiple people ask, I've got, what might be $10,000 for them could be a large amount. It would be to me. So they say, what should I do with this $10,000? I go, look, if I were you, I would be, and I didn't have any exposure to Bitcoin, I'd be spending part of it to bulk buy now, and then dollar cost averaging the rest of the way. Because it means that you're not sitting there looking at the price every day going, oh, I've lost value. And trying to get them to understand that a block of gold equals a block of gold, and the value just goes up and down. And making that analogous to Bitcoin really makes it clearer for them to accept some volatility along the way. But if their intent is to hold long term, then just dollar cost average. It's okay.
What do they say? Bitcoin is a game, and your score is your sat amount. So as long as you keep accruing more and more sats, you are winning the game. And if you spend those sats, make sure you accrue a little bit more as well.
Yeah.
I had another point there, but it slipped my mind. But that's okay. I might come back to it as we talk a bit more. Moving on from, I guess, what you're bullish about with Bitcoin. What do you think is one of the biggest threats for Bitcoin? Is there anything that concerns you?
So I did think about this the other day. I think most of the realistic threats are going to affect people on a jurisdictional level. By that I mean like a state or a country, but it's going to affect the people in a negative way. You know, I think that Bitcoin's advocates, evangelists, and the infrastructure is sufficiently decentralized enough that it benefits from bureaucratic incompetence.
Yes.
I think people give governments far too much credit. I think regional local regulations that prohibits its use or even the mining of it are only going to detrimentally affect the locals. I think China is an example of that, where while the hash power is moved offshore, the ownership has meant that, you know, if you were a Chinese citizen running a miner, you might very well choose to move to another country to continue your operations. But you know, instead of developing their energy source or regulating the industry, they just shut it all down. You know, I think that governments trying to use traditional regulations for a fundamentally different and technologically superior monetary system are doing themselves a disservice, politically a disservice, and they're doing a financial disservice to their constituents.
It's impossible to like measure or really fathom a new thing from the legacy system. So trying to use rules, regulations, even just like the old paradigm to look at this new thing, it just doesn't make sense. And you can see it sometimes in the type of legislation that gets proposed, where they'll say someone who runs a node or someone who develops a wallet, they're a payment processor. There's another term; it might not be payment processor,
money transmitter or
money transmitter, exactly. And it's like, so they need to be licensed. They need to collect the details of who's sending it, where it's going, and it's like I don't think they understand. Well, they definitely don't understand how this works.
They don't understand.
But then
that's the problem. Believe I saw a post from Senator Bragg the other night on LinkedIn. And he was calling for the regulation of exchanges to ensure they support any imposed sanctions. I think it's this kind of traditional regulation that doesn't make sense for platforms like Bitcoin. These they don't have the same operating parameters as the existing monetary network. They can't. They can't be regulated in a similar way. And trying to throw a blanket over it and go, oh, you know, these will apply. It demonstrates that they're not looking at things in detail. And maybe it's just lip service, but it perpetuates incorrect concepts about Bitcoin, which is problematic. You know, it's that type of misinformation that builds those scaffolds that you have to change, so they actually have a better understanding of the network.
I think the good part about this is it's just a matter of time. So you're right. In the short term, I agree with you. A threat, I don't know if it's a threat to Bitcoin, because if it is just a matter of time, it's more like a threat to the people that are trying to use Bitcoin at the moment. Something like that, where there's going to be countries that get kind of, they opt themselves out of Bitcoin, not because the citizens chose that, but because the government decided through not much consultation and not much understanding of the subject matter that this was something that needs to be stifled because maybe there's a risk or because it's, you know, it's too early or something along those lines. And they miss out on the innovation. And of course, their people miss out on having hard money again. And I guess where I was going with that is the good part is that with an open network, you only need someone to prosper, someone to be successful, someone to do something useful for the network, and the rest of the network does eventually benefit from it. And that could just be as simple as El Salvador running its experiment, and then other countries who were at first dismissive of Bitcoin saying, well, it seems to be working really well for them. They have more GDP, they have more foreign investment, they have more tourism. Bukele is now kind of a household name. Maybe we should look at this Bitcoin thing, even if they started at a position of banning it. I think it's just a matter of time to watch an open network, to then see it prosper and then want to be involved.
That's what we've seen happen with the circular economies, I think, is they've seen the likes of Bukele and Bitcoin Beach and El Zonte develop an economy that doesn't rely on the US dollar, doesn't require any backing of the US dollar, and can bring in those, like you said, those tourism dollars. It provides for the local economy. It provides a better floor for them to operate on economically. It benefits their people. It enriches the lives of these people overall. It doesn't have to be overnight, but it's certainly the velocity is greater than if they were to use the fiat standard that they're currently on.
And they don't need to be experts in it. They don't need to be experts in trading or investing. They just need to dollar cost average.
Yeah, that's it.
Which is a beautiful segue, because I remembered what I was going to say earlier when we were talking about dollar cost averaging. When you first got into shitcoins, and you probably did a bit of trading and everything else, how stressful was that? I remember so many sleepless nights where I would have my phone in the bed with me, and I would wake up at some ridiculous hour and be like, all right, I'll just quickly have a look and see how my trade's going. And then, 2 or 3 hours later, you're still watching the phone going like, should I sell now? Do I add a bit more? And it's stressful. Like, if the price goes up and you're successful, it's stressful, because it's like, do I sell now or do I wait? And invariably you make the wrong decision. You sell, and then it goes up another 20, 30%. And same as the price goes down, you're like, okay, I'm going to cut my losses. I know I said my stop loss is a bit lower, but I'm just going to do it now. Yeah. And then you wake up and the price is actually going like 20, 30% up. And shit, if I would have just held it a bit longer. And so many, many sleepless nights. Yeah. You have to learn a trading strategy or an investment strategy, and then you need to really control your emotions. And that takes years and years of practice. And even after that, it's something like less than 10%, less than 5% are really successful at doing it. So people anywhere in the world can learn to dollar cost average. Super simple, risk-free, takes the emotion out of it, and you thank yourself as the months and the years go by.
Yeah. It's certainly been my preferred way now. Like yourself, had some time trading, trying all these different strategies, trying to develop my own. And at the end of the day, they're not there to take your money, but that's what happens.
That's exactly, yeah. And there's some form of gambling. That's really, I believe that's all it is. Even if there is a strategy and you stick to it, there's plenty of people with systems, and they go play the roulette table or the blackjack table or the poker table. It's still gambling. That's the whole idea, is that there is no certain outcome. And in fact, the odds are stacked against you. Having a system that works all the time, or most of the time, or some of the time, doesn't actually stop it from gambling. It just means you're a good gambler, potentially. Yeah. So I think seeing it in that way, a big game of musical chairs, and it's just a matter of like, do you think you can get the seat before someone else does? If you go into it knowing that, I think that's okay. People can do what they want with their money, and if they can make a success of it, brilliant. But if not, I think go back to something like dollar cost averaging, less stressful, more profitable in my mind.
That was my approach. I set aside some money. Not very much, but I said, you know what? I'm going to see what I can do with this. Went to shit. So, I just thought, you know what? I'm gonna refocus what I'm doing. One of the ways I present Bitcoin to people that haven't got a very good understanding of it is I use the Easter show as an analogy. When you go to the Easter show, you go there with money. Everyone needs money. The world needs money. Everyone uses money to transact, etc. Whatever that currency that is, it's completely between the people transacting. But at the end of the day, everyone needs money. When you go to the Easter show, you are part of a subset of people that need money, but now you are a subset of people that want to use the arcades. You are a part of the subset that wants to play on the rides, go on a thrill ride, etc. And I've compared these tokens to those no cash value tokens that you buy with your money to go use those platforms. Tokens or other crypto are these other tokens that allow you access to a network. Ethereum's a great example. It's not there to be money. It's there to be access to use the network. You have to forfeit some of your tokens to use this network, and this is the cost of using the network.
Yeah.
Not to do anything in particular, just to use it. In the same way, all these other tokens, all these ERC20 tokens, etc., they're all just there to provide some type of access, some type of reward to the owner, some type of membership, or utility. They're not there for money. they're not there as money. Whereas, as mentioned, you are part of a subset. The total market capitalization for that is the maximum people that are interested in using that feature, that going onto that ride, going onto that thrill ride, or that playing that arcade game, or playing that pinball machine.
Yeah.
But the total maximum market capitalization for Bitcoin is the entire world's monetary supply.
That's it. It's infinity divided by 21 million, or as Greg Foss, puts it, it's about 900 trillion US in basically dollars seeking assets. And a lot of that is in negatively yielding bonds, which means if we even get a very small fraction of that gets transferred to Bitcoin, you're looking at multi-million-dollar price. Yeah. And I love that analogy, like it's store credit, it's reward points, which means you can spend it there. And if you like that store, you might get some benefit to spending their tokens. But at the same time, recognize that they could freeze your tokens, confiscate your tokens. They could print more of those tokens.
That's it.
They're benefiting ultimately by the use of those tokens. It's not the world benefits, that store benefits. And it's a good way to see it.
It's not hard money.
Exactly. And this is, the whole proof of stake versus proof of work argument. You have to often come back to say, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And if the problem that we're trying to solve is money is centralized and corruptible, and someone controlling the supply of it always leads to things like inflation, then you would say, well, we need to have less centralization. We need more decentralization. We need less people in control. And therefore, proof of work just makes a whole lot more sense. That's not to say proof of stake doesn't have its place doing something, but we haven't figured out what that something is. Like altcoins, shitcoins, they are a solution looking for a problem, whereas Bitcoin is a solution to probably the biggest problem in the world, and it works.
Yeah,
I think it's a good way to see it.
Yeah, 2017 saw a lot of people trying to solve problems with blockchain that just didn't need to be solved, or the blockchain was not a solution for it, and people are still shitcoining as a result. I know I was. But I've recognized that, and I've rearranged the items on my scaffold, and moved on. I've still got leftover assets that I'm trying to get rid of because I want more Bitcoin.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm like, hey, these are for sale. If anyone wants them, they can have them. But I'll be converting it directly to Bitcoin.
Makes sense.
Or buying more miners with them. That's basically the plan with those ones.
Perfect. Look, the thing that I've found that is almost more addictive than stacking sats is stacking hash. Buying more miners and knowing that you're going to have that passive return.
Yeah.
And if you set it up as a business, there are some tax benefits in doing that as well. So there's some smart ways to kind of play it where you can make better use of your fiat currency than just buying more Bitcoin. As long as you feel relatively comfortable with the amount of Bitcoin you have at that point, it starts to become a no-brainer to like stack hash instead.
Yep.
Or as well as, rather than
instead. I've my plan with that is to decentralize where I've actually got miners, different hosts, different locations. It means that I'm not susceptible to a particular local regulation affecting all my hash power.
Yep.
If there is a flood, I'm not losing all my miners.
True.
If there's a fire, same problem. Or if a bad actor as a host intervenes, it's not affecting me. It's affecting me, but it's not affecting me as badly as it could have. So, decentralization works just far beyond just Bitcoin. Applying it to other aspects of your life can certainly help mitigate risk.
And I think there's a culture at the moment, and I kind of agree with it, but culture and the conclusions we come to are not an on and off switch. It's more like a dial. And the culture I'm talking about is saying, like, if it's not your house, it's not your hash. Like, you shouldn't ever have hosted miners. You should have it at your home. And I agree with that, but I know that there's nuance too. And so I have a Bitcoin mining business as well, because I know you're getting into it. And I have hosted miners. And I know a lot of people will be like, oh, well, it's not really Bitcoin mining then. Well, it is. I mean, I have the stats from Slushpool to prove it. So, but at the same time, I see where they're coming from. And the way I see it is that it's not possible for me to have the amount of miners in my home compared to the amount of miners that I could have hosted. Also, Australian energy prices, not that great. Australian regulatory wise, I'm not totally convinced about yet when it comes to mining. That's not to say I don't have local miners, and I also don't want more local miners. Like, I certainly want to do that. And that's the idea, is to have more and more scale up here.
Yeah.
But there's no reason to stop myself from then having some in other jurisdictions geopolitically that I think are relatively safe through a host that I think has good skin in the game, a good reputation. Like, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
And mitigating risk usually means that you're balancing things to some degree. So you have some here, some overseas, and you keep monitoring the situation here and overseas to then determine where do you put them once the contract comes up or once you have more capacity. It just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Smart business.
It's like you said, it is a dial. You have to be comfortable with that level of risk. There is a level of risk that comes with having all your hash power at home. You don't necessarily, if it is your home, you may not necessarily have the security that you might get at a larger facility. You might not have the fire suppression or the backup air conditioning that you need to ensure that you get a level hashing temperature. Yeah, outsourcing those more technical things to people that know better, and understanding where your limits are certainly goes a long way to mitigating your risk levels.
Look, I know there is a Telegram group, which is the Australian Bitcoin mining channel, and that's not the actual specific link of it, so don't go try to look that up. But the one exists, and if anyone wants it, maybe message me or go looking on Telegram, but you'll find it. But the point is, there's lots of people in there that are very, very friendly, that are happy to help with all of that thing about like cooling or electricity and the requirements of what you have in your house versus what the miners will need. And someone I've talked to a fair bit recently is Dazbee1. It's DAZBEA and the number 1 on Twitter, and he is an electrician by trade, but he's also done an engineering degree previously, and so he has a very good understanding. He's a Bitcoin miner, he's a home miner. He looks at sort of speccing out systems and is trying to make that more the full-time thing that he does. So I know he is always keen for a chat. Hopefully he doesn't mind me saying that and then a bunch of people message him, but I'm sure he'll be okay with that. And if not, there's also that Telegram group where you've got a whole community of Bitcoin miners in Australia that are keen to help out and keen to get people hashing.
One of the projects a friend of mine and I are working on is a box, much like the black box over in Canada.
Yeah, with Steve Barber. Yeah,
that's correct. To make home mining more bearable. Part of the problem has always been the heat and the noise. So we've been playing around with some different designs. He's a carpenter by trade who accepts Bitcoin.
Very nice. Yeah. If he wants to be on the list, please maybe send me his details and I can add him, because
I'll get him added to your list, definitely. So there's certainly a lot of people that are doing their darndest to help everybody make it a viable solution. Home mining that I tried here in my apartment, not so good.
bit loud, a bit hot, yeah.
A bit loud. I think the wife basically put up with it for about 10 minutes. She goes, "What the hell is that sound?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna turn it off."
I was actually going to say, I think the biggest risk for Bitcoin mining at home is actually if you have a significant other and their sensitivity to noise and heat and that sort of thing. That tends to be the biggest risk you have to deal with. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have a place where I can necessarily vent it that isn't going to affect other people. So I thought, you know what, I'll outsource what I do. It's a cheaper cost by going a hosted route. So this certainly means that I can do so financially and with less impact on my daily life.
Makes sense.
It just stacks and it just keeps going. Our own Bitcoin printer.
Indeed, it's exactly what it is. Except it actually has a cost to print, which is what you want to see. You don't just you don't mine it with more debt, which is how the fiat currency works. Yeah, and just to acknowledge as well, I think it's really cool that you and your friend the carpenter are trying to figure out something like a black box. And I might have this wrong, but I think, did Steve Barber, did he kind of open source the design for that? Because I saw a lot of people in the Australian mining channel essentially building their own based off of his designs. Even though he sells it as a product, he's open sourced the design. Am I right with that? Or
that's correct. The design is open source. In fact, I also sent it to my friend to work on it.
Yeah.
But the design we're sort of looking for tries to baffle more of the sound. Because to me, at least from my perspective, it's less about the heat and more about the noise. If people are running a Bitcoin miner, they can do what they like with the heat. They can plumb it outside or run it inside or temper control their house with their heat.
True.
They can't do that or it's difficult to do with the sound. And so by developing a box that baffles the fans, I should say, at least then it becomes a more viable solution for them if they're going to mine at home. I know that some people do just turn down the wattage, and that's one of the great things about Bitcoin mining is that these demand response sensors that they've got going means that they can adjust. They can adjust the wattage and they can reduce the draw they have on the grid. So if you're looking to maybe heat your house up a little bit, but not way too much, you can adjust the power consumption accordingly. And that also affects the sound of the fans.
I do think in the fullness of time, and I'm thinking like in the next couple of years, there's probably going to be more and more accessible immersion mining, and even just water-cooled mining, which helps a fair bit with both the noise and the heat. Not accessible at the moment, I don't think. I mean, it is accessible in the sense that you can get it if you really want it, but I think it's relatively expensive. It takes a bit of extra technical nous to know how to then set up the machine to be able to then be immersed or water cooled.
Yeah.
So it's great to have a lot of different strategies that just make it more accessible to people.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot happening in the mining space here in Australia. You've got companies like Iris Energy that's Sydney-based but operate overseas. They operate 100% renewable. They sell all their mined Bitcoin daily, so they don't keep it on books. And so there are companies like Mawson Infrastructure who run a biogas mining facility up at Byron. So it's a industry I think that's going to continue to get better here in Australia. And by better I mean bringing some of the hash power home. It means that there's less reliance on those geopolitically sensitive locations that could change, and also means that this provides a level of more greater decentralization. People that might be uncomfortable at one place might be able to send their miners to here in Australia because, hell, we're an island.
That's right, exactly. And look, overall, even though I often have some things to say about the government and their lack of consultation and misallocation of resources and everything else, Australia is a really nice place to live. Australia does have some really great things going for it. And I think with the right information and the right kind of adoption of people and businesses, we'll be able to bring the government along for a ride where everyone can be amicable and everyone can actually prosper from it as well. So it's good to be able to help build it up in Australia, and then people overseas being able to use us as a refuge in that regard.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go.
I was going to say that I think that there hasn't been a lot done in terms of political lobbying.
True.
There is the Australian industry, Bitcoin industry body that was developed, which I think has they're certainly making inroads. But
shout out to Ethan for I think organizing a lot of that and all the members and
that kind of education and outreach is the kind of thing that's going to help propel Australia forward. Because if we just allow our politicians to be ignorant about what Bitcoin is and what it can do for our renewable or green sector, or even the load balancing for our grid, then we're going to be put at a disadvantage. Like I said earlier, some of those threats to Bitcoin are not necessarily to Bitcoin, but to the people that are being regulated possibly unfairly, or not unfairly, that are regulated poorly.
Yes.
So I think by doing that, we can prevent that type of situation happening, because those scaffolds that get built up that are incorrect are going to lead us down a path where they're going to hang all these preconceived ideas about the Bitcoin network and the power usage and the sources. As much as we know that Bitcoin is power agnostic, and it comes down to how miners decide to source their energy and what they're willing to pay to be, this idea of ESG compliant. What's my train of thought?
Oh, no. I agree. And governments need to know. I think I'll probably pick up maybe where you left that off a bit, where I know the culture in Bitcoin is that we shouldn't have any sort of centralization. We shouldn't have to go pander to the governments and talk to them about this and lobby them. However, I live in reality, and reality is that there is maybe a quicker way to get to more Bitcoin adoption and friendlier regulations. And that is through conversation, that is through education. And really another word for those two things is lobbying, which means having something like the Bitcoin industry body, having people that individually, as persons or as businesses, let other people know about things like Bitcoin mining, let their local member know about Bitcoin mining. It's that sort of stuff that does kind of accelerate some of the intermediate regulation that can really stifle innovation. We might be able to skip that part entirely, or at least speed it up if we do lobby, rather than just sort of do it on our own and expect that the state is going to pick it up and learn about it in the depth that we have. And so I think it sounded like that's sort of where you're going with it, that these are really important things for society. And I think the government doesn't understand kind of the agnostic use of energy, load balancing qualities that it has, being able to bootstrap infrastructure.
Yeah, I think by governments trying to prevent or regulate how Bitcoin is mined, it means that it could mean that it prevents the free market from being able to access energy and provide those load balancing features to our existing network, and certainly to an increasing network. I picked up a new hybrid vehicle, and at the end of the day, I look at it and go, I think this is going to be my last petrol car. I think that 5 years from now, we're going to see a very, very different service station. The servos in Australia are going to be very different. We already know that companies like Caltex are going to be rolling out EV charging stations in their facilities to complement their petrol systems. So it doesn't, to try and stifle that, to try and prevent the infrastructure needed to ensure that moves forward quickly, it needs to be brought up with policymakers. At the end of the day, policymakers don't operate in a vacuum. They get lobbied. If you want negative changes to not happen, if you don't want negative changes to happen to Bitcoin, you need to ensure that you're educating other people, especially policymakers, about what is correct.
As a bit of a tangent thought, there's another, I don't think they're brand new, but they're relatively new to Bitcoin mining in Australia. And my understanding is they want to be completely green, so only renewables. It's called Archon. And they recently had a seed investment round that set the record of seed investment rounds in Australia. So they raised about 2.6 million, if I'm remembering correctly. And this is just within the last week or so. My understanding is they're already mining, but they're using that investment round to be able to then expand further out. And their ethos is just green mining only in Australia, which is really cool. And helps to propel this stuff at a practical level, as well as I'm sure they're doing some level of political lobbying. All their investors are, as more and more people get involved. It just makes sense to have those conversations with policymakers.
Yeah, I've had a couple of conversations with mine operators here in Australia, and they are looking for green energy. It's going to be what comes around. It's going to be what complements the mining practice that they do. And it's more viable than trying to throw a 20-foot container on a coal site, like on a coal-powered energy generation facility. Trying to set it up at a solar farm that they would usually have existing infrastructure there to be able to house it, then it just makes sense. It just makes far more sense than this excess energy going to waste or not being generated at all. At least then we can use it and balance the grid.
And the good thing is I can see it getting closer and closer, or at least it's heading that right direction, isn't it?
Yeah.
More players getting involved in the industry. There's more awareness out there, and just more individuals getting into it too.
I think people like Archon, was it?
Yeah, Archon, that's right.
Yeah, companies like Archon continue to do what they do. They're going to build up that awareness through investors, through these VCs are going to understand what it's all about, and they're going to have a far better understanding of Bitcoin than the policymakers at the end of the day. But they're the ones that are going to be potentially lobbying the policymakers.
I think we've got to support them, kind of give them shout outs every once in a while and kind of see the business model, see how they do it as well.
Yeah, it's one thing to just sit here and say, oh, look, I support crypto, or Bitcoin. But I think, these politicians do need to have a better understanding about what that means, and why it's Bitcoin, not crypto.
Exactly. Hopefully they're looking overseas, because it does seem to be that there are a lot of politicians now, especially in America, that are falling over themselves to mention the word Bitcoin. I believe they understand now that there is no downside to saying that, but there is an upside, and you get a bunch of plebs follow you on Twitter, will support you essentially. And if they're just saying it as a thing to say to begin with, I'm almost okay with that, because it naturally will lead to them trying to understand it better and then going, oh, I understand this now. This is not just an investment, or not just a thing that I say to get people to follow me more. This is an actual thing that could solve a lot of the problems that I'm kind of paid to and got into this to solve.
Yeah,
brilliant. That contagious nature of it, I think, is perfect. It's what we need.
We also need both, at the very least, both sides, or a more accurate standpoint would be all sides.
Yes,
to understand the benefits. It's not just a red or blue thing over in the States. It's not just a Liberal Labor thing here in Australia. It's something that, or a green thing. It's got to be something that everyone understands the benefits of.
Yeah, I've got I've got a couple final questions for you.
Sure.
Moving on for the mining tangent, I'm curious, are there any other tangents that you've come across with Bitcoin that you didn't realize you were going to come across with Bitcoin? So what I mean by that is, I'm into the carnivore diet now, and I have been for around 6 months or more. I've done similar things in the past, but I never really fully got into it until people like Saifedean, Sean Baker. Look, there's a lot of carnivores in Bitcoin, but that kind of sent me down the carnivore route. But there's all, there's the seed oil tangent, the sunscreen, Teflon. There's so many different things that Bitcoin is. And look, some of those rabbit holes, they are very, very useful to go down if you've got the time. But I'm curious, have you come across anything that has now been like integrated into your life to some extent that you thought, you never thought was going to happen with Bitcoin?
Probably me leaving this job, my previous.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of people actually thought I was never going to actually leave the company. But 14 years with them, 10 years as ops. I don't know if there's a thing that's not related to Bitcoin. Everything, all roads lead to Rome.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
It certainly means that I've got something I'm focused on, and I'm creating efficiencies around trying to do more for the space. All the projects that I've got going personally are, I guess, a testament to that. I was always a meat eater. So that, I suppose I'm still going the same route there. Hasn't changed anything for me for that aspect. But no, I don't think there's any other hard tangents like seed oil or Teflon.
No, that's right. Look, I think that's a pretty big one. Look, reinventing your life and making it about Bitcoin. I understand that, because I'm going through that exact same journey right now as well. And it's, I think, the best thing I've done. I feel like my life has led me to this point, and I don't regret any of the experiences or the qualifications that I have. They have probably primed me to be able to be useful in Bitcoin, but also to understand Bitcoin quickly and then decide I need to let my fiat self die and I need to reinvent myself in Bitcoin. Yeah. I am just curious, for anyone listening, because you mentioned you're trying to get into a Bitcoin specific job. Can you talk a bit about what you did in your career?
Yeah,
that way people have a bit of an understanding.
Yeah, sure. I was the operations manager for a local security company.
Gotcha, yeah.
So I was managing dozens of people each week, managing the manpower and general operations of the business, multi-million-dollar turnover. So I was just done with the space. The industry has really taken a hit over the last couple of years. And with me focusing on Bitcoin and becoming more financially independent, it's meant that I can make that decision. Whilst I mentioned earlier at the start of the podcast that I would have liked to say that the journey started in 2012, when I first heard about Bitcoin, it's not something that I continued to follow up with. And seeing what happened in 2012 and the difference from a $12 Bitcoin to $20,000, I'm like, you know what? Should have backed myself. So now I'm backing myself. And I think that, like I said, if you can create changes in your life where you're going to be happier for it, you got to do it. You got to try and do what you can to make that happen.
So true. Look, there is so much research around what makes us happy, and sometimes we do focus on the wrong things. Like, money is important, but it's not really money that's the important bit. Money is then a conduit to do other things.
That's it.
And there's a lot of research that shows about 50% of our happiness, our life satisfaction, it's hereditary, it's genetic. You don't get to change that. It's called like the set point or the hedonic set point. There's about 10%, which is circumstances. So that's like our age, our gender, where we live in the world, the title that we have at work, how much money that we earn. And we feel like, because that's what we tend to strive for, the career, the title, the money, we think that that's going to have the most impact, but it doesn't. It's got about 10%. The other 40% is just called volitional activities. It's things that you decide to do, not because someone told you to do it or because you have an obligation now, but you decide to do it. So that could be a hobby, it could be setting up a business, it could be reading a book, it could be meditating, it could be working out, whatever it might be. And in my mind, money lets you have more volitional activities if you dedicate the time to it. And I think it's important to follow that, because otherwise, we have this pursuit of looking for the end goal, and it's really never about the end point. It's always about the journey. And that's very cliche, but I think if you ask anyone, like if they've climbed Mount Everest, like what was the important bit? Was it getting to the top, or was it all the stuff that happened in the meantime that made you learn what you did and build the resilience that you had, and also have a story to tell afterwards?
Yeah.
So I think similar to that, do what you love. And
exactly. It's been a very different journey from several years ago to the last 2-3 years. Having that great understanding about finance, personal finances, and managing those personal finances, and adjusting and making those changes means so much. There's so much more difference in my life as a result.
Well, look, I have a final question for you before final thoughts. Do you, because you mentioned before that you tried to consume, podcast content, but sometimes it's difficult because they can be quite long and so forth. And I understand that entirely, but I'm curious, do you listen to Hats and Brendo, the 2-Bit Idiots podcast?
2-Bit Idiots.
Never heard of it?
I've listened to one episode, I think, and I haven't really listened to it after that.
Oh, look, to be honest, that's exactly the same as me. I almost couldn't remember the name of it when I was going to ask that question. Well, anyway, moving on. Do you have any final comments, any final thoughts that are on your mind about Bitcoin or about your business or about yourself, anything that you want to just throw in there towards the end? And perhaps after the final thoughts, maybe just let people know where they want to follow you, where they can kind of, touch base with you if need be.
If you're interested in following me, I'm just on Twitter as Bayani Mills. Bayani Mills. But in terms of thoughts, I think I've gone through quite a lot today.
Definitely. I think we've covered a lot of topics, to be honest. Thank you so much for your time. I know we didn't really set a time when we started.
No,
and I thought, look, we'll do at least 30 minutes. I know we're definitely, and maybe up to an hour, but I think we're getting close to a couple of hours now. So thank you so much for your time. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm pretty sure, and also hope that other people will too, because we've covered a lot of topics, and I think it's been very educational. And it's just good to hear another person that's starting that journey. Not even starting that journey. Technically, you've been into Bitcoin longer than I have, but you're starting that transition into like a Bitcoin-focused life and a Bitcoin-focused career, which is invite to see. I love it.
No, thanks for that. No, I appreciate the invite on the show. If it can help other Bitcoiners or no coiners learn to become Bitcoiners, then I think the world's going to be a little bit better for it.
Job done. And I think we're heading that right direction with what we put out there. So thanks again for your time, and thanks everyone for listening. If you've got any content suggestions or guests that you want to see interviewed, please just let me know. You can either reach me on mission_Bitcoin on Twitter, or even the Hardblock BTC Twitter account. I'll link everything in the show notes though. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time.